Children affected by long COVID this week delivered a new support guide and letters to the Prime Minister asking for more support. Dorset-based charity Long COVID Kids was set up to offer help and guidance to families across the UK. Sammie Mcfarland is its CEO and founder. Good evening, Sammie.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Pleasure. And we've also got Dr. Sue Peters with us, an educational psychologist. Sue, hello.
Hi there.
Sammie, I want to start with you just to understand exactly what we're talking about, because I think so often in this pandemic conversation, we have considered children to be relatively immune from COVID, to not get it too seriously, to be able to manage it. Talk to us about how common it is for children to be experiencing the effects of long COVID.
Well, that's actually quite a tricky question because there's a lot of debate about the prevalence of long COVID in children, and estimates in studies are from anything from 1% to 25% of children that get COVID infection end up with long COVID. And I think that debate's going to continue for a very long time until we have an agreed definition of what long COVID is in children.
OK, so in terms of our conversation just now then, what should we define it as in terms of the effects and symptoms perhaps that children are experiencing?
Symptoms persisting for more than 4 weeks after COVID infection are classed as long COVID and require medical attention.
OK. And what are they? What are those symptoms? What are children living with?
It's a wide range of symptoms. It really affects every system in the body. So the most common ones that we see are pain, headaches, nausea, diarrhea, rashes, joint swelling, visual disturbances, neuropsychiatric symptoms, cognitive issues, fatigue. They're the most common, but there are many, many symptoms. They can be found listed on our website.
It is amazing, as I say, perhaps because we don't consider that children will be affected in this way. But actually, these symptoms are so debilitating for people of any age.
They are. Myself and my daughter have been living with long COVID now for 2 years, and our situation isn't unique. Almost all of the families that joined our support services at the beginning of the pandemic are still in the support services, still living with these symptoms, and they are significant. They're impacting every single part of every single day, and so much so that many of the children are unable to access education. They're not able to return to their previous levels of activity, and for many, sadly, aren't enjoying any activity at all.
Gosh, with that in mind then, what support does exist for children and families of children who have the symptoms that you've described? You know, pain, fatigue, cognitive issues, not able to get back to school, not able to kind of resume that kind of normal children's life, I suppose. What support is there?
Well, it's still in the very early stages of understanding long COVID, so support's very limited. Obviously, Long COVID Kids, our charity, have been offering support services since October 2020. And the NHS have 14 long COVID hubs for children in England. And these offer an MDT approach, so a multidisciplinary team approach, where lots of different experts come together to assess a child and then can refer into existing services. And some symptoms can be treated, and that's one of the reasons that we can't stress enough how important it is to keep taking children back to the doctor to try and get a referral to the hub. All children with symptoms lasting for 4 weeks or more can be referred directly to a long COVID hub, and can see specialists who are able to assess them and are gaining more knowledge now about long COVID.
Mm. What was in then the new support guide that was delivered to Downing Street in the last couple of days?
So our support guide aims to deliver all of the information that we wish we'd had when our children got ill at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's really got sections for children and young people, for parents and caregivers, and for schools as well. It gives a bit of history on what we do know about long COVID. It talks about the 5 ways that SARS-CoV-2 is different to flu, because there's a lot of comparison in the media about, we have to live with this like flu. COVID isn't like the flu, and we really need to understand the differences. And we also look at the mechanisms, the likely mechanisms that may lead to long COVID. We're really in the infancy of understanding that with research, but information is coming through now, and there is so much more out there.
Let's bring in Dr. Sue Peters at this point as well then, Sue. You know, one of the crucial points here that Sammie was highlighting is that we are in the infancy of understanding long COVID, but in the immediate term, children are struggling with symptoms that mean, for example, they can't access education in the same way as they once did.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots and lots of children, and we're hearing of more and more. And that's why the pack was developed, really, because we were just getting so many requests for support and advice. So this really is a comprehensive pack, which will guide school staff in supporting pupils. It will guide parents in managing their child's symptoms, and then once they get back to school, in supporting them as well.
What does that look like realistically? Is it a case of sort of adapting the curriculum or teaching methods or sending more work home because children can't actually physically get into school? I'm just trying to understand in the day-to-day life of a child with long COVID what the educational support looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to really depend on the child. Every child with long COVID will have in their own individual symptoms, because there are just so many different constellations of symptoms, and individual children will experience them in different ways. But for some children, the support is going to be at home. It's going to be helping them to access elements of their education, maybe through online methods, teachers checking in with them at home. For other children, they might be able to access school on a part-time timetable, but they might need rest breaks, they might need other adaptations. And for those children who are in school, there are things that teachers and support staff can think around in terms of differentiating the work for them as well.
Yeah. How concerned then, Sue, are you about the long-term impact of long COVID, which we clearly don't understand yet? Sammie was saying there that her and her daughter have been struggling now really for 2 years. You know, for children to be experiencing symptoms for such a long time that are having such an effect, there must be real concern actually about what happens in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, for our children, it's very hard to be suffering daily debilitating symptoms of something that isn't really acknowledged, isn't really understood, people aren't aware of. And I think you're right, just the not knowing and the length of time that the symptoms have gone on for is really, really tough for children. We don't know yet what the long-term impact of that will be.
Okay. And I mean, that's just something we're going to have to adapt to, I suppose, as we go on. Sammie, it's kind of difficult to come to terms with that almost. That's the reality because of our lack of understanding, not for want of trying at this point, but you know, our lack of understanding in any case means that actually from here on out, this is going to be a really evolving situation.
Absolutely, and it's exactly why we have to really think about prevention and be more curious about the effects on children. There's so much evidence now coming through from the adult research, and many of the children have comparable symptoms. So we really need to think a little bit more intellectually and a bit more curiously about, you know, what is happening to our children and what the future might hold.
In terms then, Sammie, of the support that you're offering with long COVID kids and the people that are accessing your services and your support and your network, even that community of people who can understand, you know, what is going on and sort of relate to it at least. What will you be able to do in the medium to long term for children and their families in this situation?
So we've created the support pack as a comprehensive guide, as Sue said earlier. We've also got 3 online support services for children and young people, parents and caregivers. So we have chat box, which is a sort of chat room where we can put children and parents into different channels so that they can talk to other people that are going through a very similar experience to them. And that's hugely validating for the children, particularly for children who are unable to access education and are able to mix with peers. And we also help with signposting, so to different services. We have an amazing occupational therapist, Kirsty Stanley, who works on the team, and she's able to give advice on reasonable adjustments and to really make sure that families know what is available already in service provision that families living with children with long COVID can access.
It's really fascinating speaking to both of you, and I wish you both well. Sammie, you and your daughter, particularly in your recovery from long COVID, and here's hoping it is speedy from here on out. Thank you for your time, Sammie.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Sue, Dr. Sue Peters as well. Thanks, Sue, for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Dr. Sue Peters there, an educational psychologist, and we heard as well from Sammie Mcfarland, the CEO and founder of Long COVID Kids and member of the NHS Long COVID Task Force. Long COVID then affecting children. The number of children is sort of up in the air a little, but 1% to 25% of COVID-infected children get long COVID. Clearly that is a big bracket and needs a lot more understanding. But the symptoms, pain, headaches, fatigue, cognitive issues. And Sammie saying that her and her daughter had long COVID for 2 years, which, as you heard her explain, can be really difficult in terms of getting at education and living any sense or any sort of meaningful meaningfully normal life is what I mean. You know, keeping out of school, staying at home, etc., etc. A really fascinating issue about which we need to learn so much more in order to help those who need it most.